few years back, I was renting a house in Northern California. The neighborhood was just outside of the suburbs. It seemed like the perfect balance of having space and having nice neighbors close enough to not feel isolated. The area itself had no streetlights, so it was particularly dark at night, especially if there were clouds blocking the moon. It didn't bother me though. It made my little house feel even more quaint on those dark nights. I got home from work one day during the middle of winter. It was a cloudy evening, so pulling up to my house, I saw only what my headlights and front porch light illuminated. When I got out of my car, I caught a slight whiff of cigarette smoke. That was odd, as I had never smelled that before around the house. I didn't see anyone nearby, so I ignored it and made my way inside. I had just gotten off a shift with a few hours of overtime, so I was pretty tired. Even though it wasn't quite 7 o'clock yet, I decided to take a shower and call it a night. I woke up sometime a little bit later, sure that I had heard a noise coming from inside my house. I wasn't worried right away, because a friend of mine would sometimes stop by to use my shower after work and on his way to his night classes. I had even given him a spare key so that he could stop by even when I wasn't home. He would always text me to let me know beforehand though, and I hadn't heard my phone go off. I reached over to my bedside table and picked up my cell phone to see if my friend had sent me a text. The bright light from my phone screen and number pad blinded me. These were the days before phones had a light sensor that would automatically dim the screen in the dark. And this specific phone was so bright that I could use it as a flashlight. Through squinted eyes, I could make out that it was 9 o'clock, but I couldn't tell if I had an unread text or not. I set my phone aside and called out my friend's name. There were a couple of seconds of silence before I heard loud footfalls as someone started running through the bottom floor of my house. I instantly leapt out of bed and ran to my closet. Whoever it was already up the stairs by the time I had opened the door and stepped inside. That house had 3 rooms upstairs, 2 bedrooms on either side of the hallway, the one I was in, and a spare, and a bathroom at the end of the hallway. The bedroom doors were both closed, but the bathroom door was cracked open. I heard whoever was in my house thunder down the hallway, right past my door, and into the bathroom. Thank God they did. That gave me just enough time to open the attic access in the ceiling of my closet and hoist myself up. I had just started to lift myself up when the person ran back out of the bathroom. My feet were barely inside of the attic when my bedroom door burst open. I heard loud footsteps run into my room and abruptly stop. When they didn't see me, they ran back to the hallway and into the other room, which just had boxes stacked up in a corner, some weights, and a table where I painted my miniature models. I guess they decided that if someone were hiding, it would be in the bedroom, because they charged right back into my room and flipped on the light. A moment later, the closet door was ripped open. I was crouched inside my attic, just a foot or so away from the access, so I could try to stop them if they started to climb up. From my vantage point, all I could see was from their knee down. They were wearing dirty blue jeans with frayed cuffs and worn work boots. After a few seconds of looking through the closet, they stepped away, and I heard a loud crash emanating from my room, followed by a pained scream of frustration and anger. That scream had to be the most unnerving part of the incident for me. It reminded me far too much of my stepfather, who would scream in a similar way when he lost his temper. The man in my house then ran back down the stairs. I heard crashes and clatters as things were thrown around, and furniture was knocked over. I stayed crouched in the attic, silent. I had accidentally left my cell phone when I ran for the closet, and I wasn't certain I could climb down without him hearing. After some time, the noises stopped. I started counting slowly, and when I reached 1,000, I decided that it was safe enough to climb down and call the police. The first thing that I noticed when I exited the closet was that the intruder had flipped my bed over, I assume in an attempt to find me. That was a loud noise that I had heard after he stepped away from the closet, and I couldn't find my cell phone. So I went to the landline by my bed and phoned 911. I waited in my room until I heard the authorities call out from downstairs. As I made my way down, I noticed that the first floor was a mess, but I had expected that. Chairs had been knocked over, the sofa had been flipped. All the books, pictures, and knickknacks I had on my shelves were strewn across the floor. The cupboards in the kitchen had been opened, and all the boxed and canned food had been thrown to the ground. As far as I could tell, the only thing missing was a single knife out of the wooden block in my kitchen. The police checked my house from top to bottom. They found that the side door had been forced open by something, likely a crowbar. They also found a few cigarette butts along my fence line, along with some tinfoil and an empty pen tube, which the police told me people often use when they're smoking meth. So they think that whoever this was had been watching my house for quite a while. I realized that he must have been out there smoking a cigarette when I got home. The police collected up the evidence and told me I should stay with family or friends that night and get that door fixed as soon as possible. Instead of leaving the house, I just opted not to sleep. I moved a shelf over to block the broken door and spent the next couple hours cleaning things up. I would often go to the window with a flashlight and shine it along the fence line where the police found the cigarette butts and foil. But each time I did this, I didn't see a thing. The next day, I called to have the door fixed and motion lights installed at the back and sides of my house. I ran a phone cable up into the attic and added another landline. I never wanted to be stuck up there without a phone again. Nothing else happened at that house, though. I lived there another 3 years without any further incident. One more precaution that I took was practicing getting out of my bed, going to my closet, and climbing into the attic as quickly and as quietly as possible. I even kept at it when I moved, except now I go to a crawl space at the back of the closet instead of up into the attic. I try not to think about what would have happened if I had been a bit slower getting to the attic, or if he hadn't gone into the bathroom at the end of the hall first. I started reading the posts here recently, and I realized that I had my own story that would fit in well. So here goes. I'm a 27-year-old woman, and this happened to me maybe 10 years ago when I was a senior in high school. My family and I lived in a pretty large house, but at this time, my siblings were all away at college or boarding school, so it was only me and my parents in the house. I'm a crazy light sleeper, so when I woke up in the dark and saw my alarm clock flashing 3:11 a.m., I wasn't too surprised. However, I was wide awake, not just groggily stirring in and out of sleep. I lay there wondering what had caused me to wake up when I heard a set of very soft footsteps on the stairs right outside of my bedroom door. The door to my room was parallel to the left side of my bed, and I happened to be laying with my back to the door. When the footsteps approached, I thought it must have been one of my parents checking on me for some reason. Then the doorknob was turned, ever so slowly. Still, I thought they were just trying not to wake me. The door began to open, again, slowly and carefully. The heavy door itself made a creaking noise when you opened it, no matter how slowly or carefully you went. So whoever was behind the door finally just shoved it the rest of the way to silence the creak. Still, my naive teenager brain thought that it was my parents, until whoever it was clicked on a flashlight. I froze, laying there as terror flooded me, and I remember that I instantly broke out in a sweat. They were behind me. I was facing away, so they couldn't see my eyes wide open as they shunned the beam straight onto me. I always used to think that if something like that ever happened, I would be such a badass, and I would whip out of bed, punch them, attack them, shout and scream, do something. But I could do nothing at all. All I could do was try to keep my breathing deep and even, despite the pounding of my heart in my chest. That way the intruder wouldn't know that I was awake. When after about 10 seconds, they finally moved the light away. I prayed, begged, and bartered with anything that would listen to me as the intruder walked around my room, looking at my things. I could vaguely see their shape in shadow form move along my dimly lit wall. They were large and bulky, almost as if they were wearing multiple coats. They had a baseball cap on. They didn't shine the flashlight on me again, and after a few minutes, which of course felt like hours, they finally exited my room. I could still hear them though, walking around the rest of the second floor, through my siblings' empty bedrooms. I was still in a cold sweat, frozen and paralyzed in terror, just not knowing what to do. I wanted to grab my phone and call my dad, who I know was sleeping downstairs. I wanted to call our landline, so that the phone would fill the entire house with its ringing sound and undoubtedly wake both my parents up. I wanted to call the police. I wanted to get up and run for my room. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't bring myself to do any of those things. I was afraid that whoever it was in our house would hear me, and I didn't know if they had a weapon and would try to hurt me or my parents. I wouldn't wish the helpless feeling of terror that I felt that night on my worst enemy. I don't know how, but I must have passed out from fear, or the adrenaline wore off, because the next thing I knew, it was 6 a.m., and I could hear my parents downstairs. I basically ran down to our first floor, and as calmly as I could, I asked them if one of them had been in my room last night. Their faces went blank, and they said no, they hadn't. That was the last straw for me. I broke down in sobs and told them, then someone was in my room last night. Even as I share this now, my hands have begun shaking, and I've teared up. The police were called, even though there was little that they could do at that point. Apparently, when my parents woke up, all of the doors to the outside were standing wide open, and there was a duffel bag at the bottom of our stairs. All that was inside was a coil of nylon rope and an empty USB flash drive. I don't want to think about what those items were for. The intruder hadn't taken anything, and we have no idea why they left our house in what appeared to be a hurry. That, in and of itself, I find to be rather unsettling too. It took me about a week to be able to sleep in my own room again, a sanctuary which felt violated and frightening to me now. I carry pepper spray, sleep with a machete next to my bed, and double-check each and every lock of my house every single night. Hopefully, this will never happen again, but if it does, then I hope I won't freeze. It's been a decade now, and my most common nightmare is that someone is in my room, standing in the shadows, just watching me. This story that I'd like to share came from when I was very young. I was probably no older than 5 or 6 at this time, so I don't remember a whole lot, and my parents have filled in the gaps for me. So I'm going to tell the whole version of the story, both my parts and my parents. We were living in an old farmhouse at the time. My parents were pretty poor, so they rented from a landlord that owned a few small properties in the area. My dad worked in the local steel mill on the midnight shift, so he worked what I'd call odd hours. This is relevant because it might be the only reason that we're still alive and that I'm able to share this story today. In the middle of the night, we hear a crash right outside of our house. Then we hear frantic screams. "Help! Help! He's going to get me! Somebody please help me!" We all jolted out of bed and were fully awake in an instant. I was sleeping in bed with my parents at the time because I had been having awful night terrors. I'm sure that a lot of us can remember those from being a child. My dad, who had actually just been switched from the midnight shift to days, jumped out of bed and cautiously made his way down the stairs, grabbing a stoking pick from the fireplace in the living room as he moved towards the door. He got to it, and that's when he heard it again. "Help! Oh my God, he's coming! Somebody help me!" It was a woman's voice on the other side of the door, and they began sobbing hysterically. "We have to help her. Open the door," said my mom. My mother is an inherently good woman who always goes out of her way to help people every single chance that she gets. I'd say that it's one of her distinctive qualities that makes her the person that she is. But on this night, it was almost a fatal flaw. As she reached for the deadbolt, my dad stopped her. He shot her a look and said cautiously through the door, "What's going on? Who's after you? Where are they?" The voice through the door responded, "I just need to get in before he gets here. Please, please." More sobs. My father turned on the porch light and said, "Stay on the porch with your back against the door." He then opened the deadbolt, but not the chain lock. He slipped a brick that we used as a doorstop through the crack. "Take this and use it to defend yourself if you need it. I'll be right on the other side of this door, and if he comes after you, I'll be out there in an instant to help. But right now, I'm calling the police. They'll be here soon." This is when the woman started to absolutely lose her mind on us. She began slamming her entire body into the door in a mindless fury. "What the fuck's wrong with you? Let me in this goddamn house right now. What kind of people are you?" My dad forced the door shut and clicked the deadbolt home once again. That's when he phoned the police like he promised he would, and they arrived at our front door within 10 minutes. When they got there, the woman was simply gone. The doorstep brick was sitting on one of the porch steps. My parents gave a description of the events and the woman as best as they could. We tried our best to get some sleep in the following evenings, but Mom and Dad checked all of the locks and windows several times throughout the night. So, even as a kid, I knew that something was amiss. I don't remember understanding what had happened, but I remember thinking that my parents were acting strange and wondering why they didn't help this woman. I thought that the man snuck up on her and got her while we were calling the police. But it turns out that that wasn't the case at all. A few days later, we found out that the police had been called for a similar situation down the road. My dad's brother-in-law worked in law enforcement, and he told us that this time, the police had happened to have a car right down the street and arrived without using lights and sirens. The officers saw the woman that my parents had described at the front door of another house. When the cops got out of their car and began walking up to the woman, a man dashed away from the bushes on the side of the porch. They chased him down pretty quickly and recovered a long kitchen knife from the bushes where he had been hiding. The man and woman had been working together to try to gain entry to houses. The police surmised that the panicked woman would get people to open their door, let her in their homes, and then she'd let her partner in. God only knows what he would have done once he got inside. Once I heard this story and put it together with my memories of the event, it sent chills down my spine. Imagine what would have happened if my dad had been working the midnight shift, or if he had stayed asleep. He grew up in a particularly bad Indiana neighborhood, so he was always overly cautious about people around him. Growing up, I always found it mildly irritating. But this time, I have no doubts that it likely saved our lives.